Tanaka. This is Ambassador Joseph Cella. I have the great delight to be seated next to Mr. Harold Swann, a fine gentleman who I recently met here in Suva, who is living history. We began talking about World War II in the Pacific, and he was a boy at that time. This year at the embassy, we have celebrated the peace we've been blessed with for 75 years in the Pacific, commemorating various notable events such as VE Day, VJ Day. Last week we commemorated the beginning of the Battle of Tarawa, and Fiji blessedly stood by our side during World War I and World War II. Many of Mr. Swann's forebears and fellow countrymen served and sacrificed in the different theaters, and we're grateful for that. Our common principles of our founding documents and timeless truths really were the basis of that friendship and alliance and partnership that exists to this day, and we're grateful for that. I just would like to welcome you, Mr. Swann, to the embassy.
Thank you.
Is this your first time here at the embassy?
Under this building, yes. Used to be a golf club here and a guava patch here, and that's when I used to come for the guavas.
Oh, really? A few years ago.
Oh, yeah, that's a long time ago.
Well, welcome. We're again
Thank
honored to have you here and share your testimony
Thank you.
With us. So, what year were you born, and where were you born?
I was born in 1934 at the CWM Hospital, and we lived down in the area which was then known as Naingangi. It used to be an old sugar mill there in the early days, and that's why they called it Naingangi, which means a wheel. And that is where the government building is. That's the area. That is where I was born, and that's where I was raised, in that particular area, just around where the FBC is today.
Sure, yeah.
That was our homestead around there.
So, 1934, you would have been 7 years old when World War II began in the Pacific, correct?
Yes.
So, do you remember learning that war had come to the Pacific as a boy, and how did you learn about it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, because they brought in the curfews, and there was a lot of news on the radio.
Really? Wow.
And I think we got a lot of BBC news at the time.
I see.
And we were updated, and at the hour at 6 o'clock, I think, in the evening, there would be this BBC news, and we'd all sit down and listen to the happenings and the progress of the war. And though I didn't understand much of it, but you could feel the tension that everybody had. And at night, there was total blackout. So we, being mischievous children, we made it our job to escape and run around the various areas and dodge the soldiers that went around patrolling to check people, you know.
What were they? Are Fijian soldiers?
Fijian, oh, yeah, only
Fijian
Fijian soldiers, and that was the war. And also now and then we had the New Zealand Air Force fly across our skies, and of course, when that happened, that was a little bit of fear for us, because we heard about these bombings and whatever, and we were told that the airplanes were doing this. And then later on, I think they incorporated the flying of these seaplanes at the time of our drills for curfew. You know, they dug air raid shelters in all these soapstone hills
really?
here, and
Wow.
we had one close to our school there, and whenever the siren went, like they have it now for the tsunami, we'd all run from school into the tunnels, and about 11 o'clock in the morning, I think that was. So,
Now, if I recall, there were two locations, or maybe three locations for the Air Forces. There was, I think, a seaplane port at Lauthala Bay,
yes,
and then
yes.
at Nasori, and then in Nandi as well.
That,
Is
yeah.
that true?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Mhm.
The one that, of course, we only were familiar with the seaplanes. Nasori and Nandi, well, Nasori was just about the same as being in Nandi those days, eh?
Yeah.
And it was all controlled by the forces. I'm not sure, but I think it was the American forces that actually opened Nandi Airport.
I think they cut the runway.
Yeah, I think they did that, yeah.
What two events happening in Fiji during the time of the war do you remember most vividly?
Oh, definitely. When our soldiers marched off to the Solomon Islands, to see so many women weeping and actually pulling their sons not to go, you know. That was very moving and, for me. That at the time I didn't fully realize what was happening, that these guys would go and die. For me, it was like a big farewell. But to see these women wailing, I was wondering at that time, why are they crying? You know?
Wow, yeah.
Then, of course, they returned. Because all these events always was preceded or afterwards with a parade in the Albert Park. And that was a great event in Suva those days when they had the parade. The other one that came to mind was that there was a Japanese submarine, I think, that was approaching Suva.
Wow.
And there was an alert put out, and then I think all the forces got into it, and after a couple of days they said that the submarine had disappeared. That's the closest that we had to being involved.
So do you back to the soldiers mustering and marching in formation before heading off to the Solomon Islands campaign. How many soldiers do you recall were?
There would have been hundreds of them, yeah. Hundreds of them. They started from Necesse and then marched straight. I was standing where the GPH is now. And their lines extended back to the GPH and then further up into Suva there, yeah.
And then they were boarding ships.
Yeah, they came to the wharf in Suva and then they boarded the ships from Suva.
And where were you standing at that time? Do you remember where you were at that day? Yeah,
from the GPH, and then I ran to where the market is today. That was about the furthest we could go. There was a fence there, and that's where the soldiers marched in and boarded the ship. And all us young kids were just looking at all these women crying. Women always cry, don't they?
Yeah. Emotional time, sad time.
Yeah.
And do you remember them returning and from the Solomons?
Oh, yes.
You were there for that?
Yeah, I was standing where the Metropole Hotel is now. It's still standing there today, Metropole, just up to the market. And they came and they got into, some got into trucks and then some marched. I don't know why. What was the difference? But some passed us on the trucks and then some were marching.
Do you have any memories of American troops and Allied troops being here, and were they embraced by Fijians?
Well, most important, of course, was the Americans, because I don't think that they came to help defend Fiji. They came as a place of a holiday for them, from the Solomons, I think, and from Tara, where they were. But when they came in and they just relaxed. They never participated in any of the security events or any other parades, nothing.
And I think there was a hospital barracks, I believe, a U.S. Army military hospital here for treating those that got sick or wounded, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there is a military hospital, and I think all the forces, including the British, had their hospital in the same area, which is just in Tamavua, further on from here.
I see.
Yeah. That I think, and I checked with my brother in Australia, and he confirmed, yeah, that is where because we very seldom came up this way during the war years because of curfews and everything else. It's only after the war years that we were able to wander out a bit. But yeah, military camps were all, hospitals were all based up here in Tamavua.
Yeah, who knew at that point when you're in the midst of American Army soldiers, fast forwarding now, one of your children, you have a tie now to America through one of your children.
Oh,
Can you
yeah.
share a little bit about your son?
Yeah, well, Scott Jennings, he came down as a Green Beret, and I think he got taken up with Fiji. I think he spent only 1 or 2 years here. He went back, and then he came back as a civilian, and I remember he called me, he said, what can I do if I come to Fiji? Obviously, he came for my daughter.
Your son-in-law.
Son-in-law, yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Right.
And I said, well, do you know anything about gyms? At that time, I had thought about setting up a gym. I had played a lot of sports, and I had sort of retired. And he said, oh, yeah, I know. I did physiotherapy and all that stuff there. So he came down and married my daughter, and then he set up this gym. But I never thought that time that I would be associated with son-in-law and also with Resnick, you know, the owner of Fiji Waters.
Sure.
Because he came and I met him down
there.
I showed him around the wharf down in Suva. Never even passed my mind.
So, and your son-in-law is a retired Green Beret Special Forces soldier.
Yeah.
And before I forget, what was your life's work here in Suva? What was your profession?
Oh, I was a shipping man. In those days, it was more getting a job. You took what was offered. I started my working career in Levuka, the old capital. Then I eventually Levuka lost the economy was driven down because of the removal of copper from Levuka. So I then came to Suva and worked in shipping. So I've been in the shipping, mainly on the wharf in the shipping operations for 42 years.
One, back to your childhood, one iconic memory that I've heard many testify to when they were children during the war. It's an iconic memory, and there's iconic photos of it when soldiers would hand out sweets or treats or other keepsakes to children, whether in Europe or the Pacific. I know that after the war, Berlin was closed down, and the pilots flying over the C-47s would drop parachute candy to the children. Okay. Do you have any memories of anything similar here? Interactions like that with the soldiers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, they were always very generous in that regard, and I think they brought Coca-Cola into Fiji.
Oh, they did?
I'm pretty sure, because we always, whenever we met them, and I had a friend as well who was, with him I got very friendly, and he always had a bottle of Coke for me and chewing gum, a packet of chewing gum. And the Coca-Cola, I think, was eventually taken over by a Chinese shop, which is Jensen's. They still own a shop in Suva there, but this was the only shop that sold Coca-Cola. And we used to wait out there just in case somebody gave us a sip of their Coca-Cola. It was in the big bottle, those beautiful bottles those days.
Glass bottles at the time, right?
Yeah. But this guy I met when I knocked off from school has to go down there, and they were living in the town hall, which is the present town hall. It had all their stretchers in there, and then we used to go and swim in the sea bars just alongside, and that's where most of the forces spent their time, in the sea bars there, and just walking around, so relaxing. Like I say, they didn't seem to have anything else to do but just to relax.
Yeah. Downtime. Between tours of deployments. Do you remember when the war ended? And I guess the sentiment of the time, obviously you had described at the beginning of our conversation how it was a bit of a scary time. Curfews happened, lights out at night, and a lot of uncertainty. And any recollection of the conclusion of the war?
There was not a dramatic, like a cut, and then we went from one to the end to the other end. They maintained all the curfews and that for a while until things settled down. So we sort of slowly phased into the new life that we got into. We found that we could wander a bit further out, because when the war was on, we were not allowed to even to wander too far out of our own areas. You know? Sure. The soldiers, the Fiji soldiers, were always patrolling and keeping people in their own backyard sort of thing. But no, there was no dramatic cutting of it. It just slowly was phased into the new era.
Was there a parade of any sort celebrating the conclusion of the war, or was it fairly routine? Soldiers came back from the Solomons and life steadily resumed. There was no pomp and circumstance or
I can't remember anything like that at all, because the one event that affected us at the time, school children, were that the schools were open then for the full day.
I see.
Because the American forces had taken over the grounds at the school there, and also the first floor of the building, we were restricted to half days. So we'd go in for 2-3 hours in the morning, and then another set of students would come in and take over the rest of the day. So when the war ended, we then were able to have a full day at school.
Life back to normal.
Back to normal.
I really appreciate your reflections and your time. Mr. Swann and I will be heading out to Suva, visiting a few historical sites that he remembers that are notable for World War II, and we'll be doing some additional reflections when we get there, and you'll point us in various directions where what was happening and when.
Okay, yeah.
Look forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Swann.
Okay, Naka.
God bless. Okay, thank you very much.
This is coming to these old buildings, see?
Oh, okay, so this is the Fiji CDC up here, right? Okay.
Yeah, this is the one there, all these old buildings. You can see the old structure there, all that. This was the military hospital.
And when you say military hospital, you say is an American military hospital.
American, and for the British and for even our soldiers, I think this was all, they were all out here. Because it's quite a big area.
It's a big complex, yeah. We are at the old U.S. Army Barracks Hospital here. Can you just reflect a little bit about where we're at and what you remember being here back in the day?
Yeah, this would be the hospital for all the forces, I take it, including any British or Fiji people who were sick. At that time, there were no like injuries of such for war, but it was just there for the fewer sickness that soldiers had. But this was the area that we knew then as the military hospital.
There was an American movie star who passed away this year, Olivia De Havilland. She was from Gone with the Wind, as you remember. She died at the age of 104 this past summer, and we gave a nod to her. And she was actually on a USO tour during World War II, and it brought her here. I found several iconic photos of her. Beautiful woman, striking, and very gifted, and photographed here in Suva. And within days of her arrival, she took ill. She hit 104 fever, some airborne disease, I'm sure, and then lost. She wasted away down to 90 pounds, but recovered. But it's my understanding she was treated and cared for at a U.S. Army hospital. So this was probably the one. Interesting. Well, very good. This is very interesting. We'll continue on to our next stop.
Okay, good.
Okay, very good. All right.
The old school building has been pulled down. Okay. That's the ground set.
Oh, there's one. I visited here not too long ago and brought some books and talked to some of the boys.
Yeah, it was during the war years where this lower section of this concrete building was occupied by the American forces. And we did our schooling above here and on the old building that's now being demolished. And then from here they extended on to the playground, which we will go and see, and that they basically operated from below here.
So this is Maris Boys Primary School.
Yes.
And Champagnat Hall. So this first floor was occupied by U.S. Army, doing various logistical work and planning in the Pacific here.
In those days, the school was known as St. Felix College.
St. Felix College.
St. Felix.
Right. Very good. Okay, so we're off to see the other.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I had to bring some living history here.
Oh,
you know Mr. Swann?
I know, boy.
Mr. Swann, yeah. It's a familiar name.
So we're doing just an interview with him. I asked him a few questions. We met just a couple weeks ago, and after Remembrance Day, and he was 7 years old when World War I broke out. So I had some fascinating testimonials.
And we had the military here. All up the stairs, you see there. You see the soapstone.
Yeah.
They've sealed off the
Air raid shutter.
the caves. Those were caves.
Air raid shutter.
Right there.
Yeah. Those are caves going underneath those soapstones.
No kidding.
All up.
That's
where it's during the war.
Yeah.
Those are shelters.
Oh my goodness.
So they've sealed it off.
Take care. See you. Take care. God bless.
So this was our playground for the St. Felix College and St. Robert's Boys. And when the war broke out, it was the American forces, and I think it was the transport division who occupied this whole ground. The whole ground was occupied with military huts and all their vehicles. That's why I think it was a transport division of the American forces during the war years. And besides that ground floor on the other side, these buildings were all occupied by the soldiers of the transport drivers, I suppose, of the American forces.
So would the trucks come in this very
In
spot?
this very
Right here.
driveway.
I'll be darned.
They took up the whole drive.
Wow.
Yeah, throughout various parts of Suva, these caves that were dug out by the labor forces, I think, at the time, for as air raid shelters. And inside them, they had benches. They had little facilities for water and providing, I think, tea or something. And they go right in. I think this one could go in for at least 40 to 60.
Just a big cavern.
Yeah, just a big cavern, just up right in, winding. Just following the hills. A lot of the hills been cut down, of course, since then, but he used to wind in there so that hundreds of people could get in there.
And you were saying that these were scattered throughout Suva.
Yeah, throughout Suva, yeah.
Roughly numbering 16.
Easy 16.
Yeah.
Easy 16.
And then after the war, just sealed up to prevent
sealed
any
up,
mischief or what have you. Yeah. And that's soapstone.
It's soapstone.
Yeah.
Even to this day, this is where they still have the parade.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Albert Park.
Mr. Swann, just maybe reflect on Albert Park here and what you remember present here during World War II.
It was the one area in Suva where all parades were held, and I think this is also where Kingsford Smith landed his aircraft.
Kingsford Smith, that's right, 1928.
Yeah, and they had the pavilion over at that end. Now they've moved it to the other side, but that's where he landed his aircraft. And all the parades during the war and after the war, even up to the present day, are all still held here. And I think I'd be quite safe to say that the first baseball games in Suva were played in this park.
Brought to Suva by the American troops in World War II. I'll be darned. That's the first I've heard of that.
But that's the only playing area you had in Suva. And I think they only had little quarters like this, but there was always rugby field or cricket pitches. So this was the area where they used to play baseball, hockey, all this area right here. Yeah, it was during the war. I think they did all their training here as well, because they had access to Albert Park. But these were all military barracks. They were just the old wooden military barracks, lined right across here, I think 2 or 3, 4 rows of them. And the soldiers were billeted here, did all their training from here, and they marched from here to join the ship to go to the Solomon Islands.
So they would muster here,
Yeah.
they went out this way,
Yeah.
down to Queen Elizabeth,
Queen Elizabeth Drive, yeah. Right up
and then to the wharf.
to the wharf, yeah.
And you were gathered where, in relation to where we're at now, were you were gathered down along Queen Elizabeth at a couple of different spots, seeing the soldiers
Yeah,
as they.
first I was at the GPH.
Okay.
That's the first area because of the Albert Park. We always played around with the kids, and then this parade day. And I can't recall, it must have been a holiday, not too sure. But we were down in the park, and then the parade started, so we all rushed to the sidewalk there to see what was happening. Yeah.
Amazing.
Soldiers.
Amazing. Yeah.
And then all these women would cry.
Yeah. Were they, so they had their rucksacks on and they had their rifles
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
on their shoulder.
Yeah. No, I don't think they had their rucksacks on. They were just marching
Okay. With their rifles.
with their rifles. Yeah. And in their famous khaki uniform, which was very easy for the woman to grip on and pull them. But these guys kept their composure and they stuck in line. They kept pulling back to walking.
Yeah. Tough time.
Oh yeah. These are the old buildings on the left. They're still original buildings.
These are original World War II era buildings.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah,
And what were these for? These were military offices?
No, residential.
Oh, these are residential.
And you see, over the veranda was there before. They just mixed the grog on the porch there, and on the veranda there, and people just walked in and.
So these were restaurants then, as they
No.
residents.
All residents.
Residents.
All residents. Yeah.
And occupied by just local Fijians.
Yeah, mainly by part Europeans. Mainly by the part Europeans.
Europeans. I see. Okay. And then soldiers would go up there and
Yeah, just walking in, put a
share a
bottle
bowl
down,
and
yeah, enjoying the singing and the dancing, that whatever they.
I'll be darned. All of this, all along here, right? I'll be darned. What did you? What was there during?
Well, we were living there, and from here we moved up to there.
So you lived here,
Yeah, I lived there.
right here.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It was here, and the other streets, there was the Sea Scout. But this is the grounds behind me here where all this building is. That was their playing field for Suva Grammar School.
Suva Grammar School, boys' grammar
Boys'
school.
Grammar School. And they were camped in this ground as well.
The soldiers.
Soldiers.
Fiji.
No,
Fiji.
no,
FMF or
Yeah,
American.
No, the American soldiers.
American soldiers. So they just had tented
No, they're
tented
barracks
camps, barracks.
Here. Some tents, ready, the barracks. And the others,
How many troops would you say were here that you could recall?
Easy. 15, 16.
Yeah. What a view they had. It was called Suva what? Suva sea bass, really?
Yeah.
And pools or baths where you would just
One big pool, as it is today.
oh my gosh.
Yeah, as it is today. They had a pumping station there down by the foreshore, and they pumped in the salt water.
Very therapeutic properties of salt water.
And of course,
Yeah, beautiful. Wow. Okay, so this is Mr. Swann. You see the aerial photo here that says the when it was the sea bass.
yeah, sea bass, yeah, that's it. Yeah. Sea bass, that's it.
1925.
Yeah. That's the one, this is where they have the ladies.
Oh, so they had separate pools for men and women?
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my
yeah.
goodness, no
God.
kidding.
Heaven forbid the English they could never have their women.
I'll be darned. Huh.
It's the best understanding.
Okay. Walk around. Feel free.
Yeah.
Oh, great,
nice.
thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's the
Wow.
I look at the ladies.
So this
yeah.
that would have been the ladies
Yeah,
right
it was
there.
filmed in there.
Oh my god.
But that's all the original. This is the baby's pool when I was. Not too much because that pavilion is still the original pavilion.
That pavilion was there
Yeah,
during World War II.
yeah.
So
Stage back there.
that was a stage.
Stage. This is where we used to have concerts. That's where we took the British town hall.
I see. Amazing. Defense forces. The main purpose of this unit at the time was to protect vulnerable points such as fuel dumps and important government buildings in the Suva area. With the U.S. entrance into the war, the U.S. sought a forward training area and resupply base to serve as a potential line of defense against the Japanese sweep through the Pacific. Fiji, geographically and logistically, was the best location. In June of '42, the 37th Division in its entirety had established a base of operations throughout Fiji. With the arrival of U.S. forces, it was decided to relieve the New Zealand Defense Forces and place the Fiji Defense Force under U.S. control. The shift of power was completed on June 30th of '42. The Fiji Defense Force saw extensive use throughout the war, and after the Solomon Islands campaign, the demobilization of Fiji forces was announced on September 1st, 1945, just less than a month after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki,
Oh, right.
and just a few days before the terms of surrender were signed in Tokyo Harbor. This is where the troops embarked.
Yeah, this is where the Fiji troops embarked on their way to the Solomon Islands. And it was just a one-lane street straight into the wharf area. And I was just standing there with the crowd. This was an open area. And I was just standing there watching the parade and all the women crying. As they marched in, they boarded the vessel directly. And I think it sailed that night.
So just a little bit of a recap. What I read to you earlier, the Fiji Infantry Regiment in its current form traces its history back to World War II. Prior to this, the Fiji Infantry was formed as a territorial battalion with additional rifle companies a part of the Fiji Defense Force. In May of 1940, a regular rifle company was formed. The first of 3 intakes of recruits were then formed into the 1st Battalion Fiji Defense Force in October of 40. The 2nd Battalion, formed after the outbreak of the war, became the territorial unit. Units served in World War II initially under the command of Colonel J.E. Workman of the New Zealand Defense Force. And the main purpose of the unit was to protect vulnerable points, fuel depots, and other government buildings here in Suva. So we'll fast forward to the day you were here in 1943. So the 1st Battalion of the Fiji Infantry Regiment was raised and requested in U.S. forces deployed in the Pacific Theater during World War II for operations in the Solomons. So the battalion left here in Suva in 1943, and they saw action in Guadalcanal, Humbagara, Bougainville, and other areas of the Solomons, and they spent 17 months overseas. They returned to Fiji in 1944. Quite a haul.
Yeah. Right over here.
Right here.
Yeah. There we go.
Oh my. So 76 years ago, you were standing right here, and you're seeing them
Come back
disembark.
again. And the first one came in trucks, and then after 2 months.
Maybe the wounded were taken off in trucks.
Probably, if I know the people, the cooks probably came out first and then cooked the meat.
I see.
Yeah.
Food first.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Swann, I really appreciate your generosity of your time,
No problem. No, it's very
your
good to
patience,
recollect.
living history.
Yeah. It revives all the memories. And,
All right, God bless. All right,
Okay,
thank you,
yeah.
sir. Really
Okay,
appreciate it.